Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Europa Rediviva. I'd like to speak today about technocratic government. We keep on hearing this moniker, technocracy, and I'd like to argue the fact that it doesn't mean anything. So, even though, because it exists as a concept, we might be tempted to think that it actually refers to something, it actually doesn't refer to anything. So, if you look at the definition, it means government by the people who are specialists. But then again, government should always be exercised, right? Power should always be exercised by the people who are competent. And ministerial portfolios should be occupied by people who have expertise in those areas. So this is not necessarily something that distinguishes political government from technocratic government. Technocratic government is something that is a situation that occurs when there is no majority that can uphold a political government, that can uphold a coalition of parties, but the parliamentary, there is a parliamentary majority willing to uphold a government made up of people who are not affiliated with political parties. This is kind of the idea. However, in practice, if we look at actual cases of technocratic government, it's also political. So it's just a way of disguising a political alliance, a covert political alliance, or perhaps some political structures that are not out in the open, such as those deriving from military alliances. And I'd like to take some examples. So, for example, a couple of years ago, the Netherlands had technocratic government after Mark Rutte went on to lead NATO. And what was that technocratic government? Well, it was made up of political appointees from the political parties of the right-wing coalition, and the prime minister was a technocrat, allegedly. So he was a specialist. He was Dick Schoof, the head of the AIVD, which is the domestic intelligence service of the Netherlands. What was his area of expertise? Well, I will argue that his area of expertise was to run the country to the interest of NATO. So, to basically continue the NATO line that Rutte held during the pandemic, and to make sure that no modifications are made, no alterations are made. He became prime minister as a consequence of a big protest vote. So there were 3 parties in government out of the 4 in the coalition that had never been in power. Actually, 2 of them had never been in parliament, and one of them also dissolved in the next elections. So, and the other one is close to having the same fate. So it was a coalition government of new entrants in the echelons of power, plus the party of Rutte, VVD, which was inherited by a hawkish, she's now the defense minister, a lady with Turkish background, but very, very much towing the American line. And in what way was this government technocratic? Well, even though it came as a consequence of the protest vote regarding the pandemic measures, the protest parties were not exactly allowed to govern. They were under the helm of the intelligence services, which are under the helm of NATO, because this is how intelligence services are structured in the NATO space. And the health minister that came after the Rutte government, so the health minister from the Dick Schoof government, a lady from PVV, from the party of Geert Wilders, admitted that the pandemic measures, not only the Netherlands, it can be assumed that all across NATO, were driven through measures dictated by NATO. So they were enacted in a military fashion. This is why they were. This is why they did not diverge too much between countries, between Western countries, even though they were absurd. So even though a rational approach to them was to just see that they are completely absurd and unhinged, and they should not be enacted, and they go completely against personal freedoms, and they're more akin to installing a dictatorship. And yet, not only were they enacted, they were also defended by the network of influencers that also function under the NATO wing, and by the official press, and by the systemic parties, and so on. So some will argue that this was somehow a preparation for the militarization of society in view of the war against Russia, the upcoming war against Russia. So a dry run in seeing how society can be quickly militarized against an invisible enemy. There are people like Matthias Desmet who say that it's something part of group psychology deriving from our own anxieties, and that it's somehow spontaneously formed. I'm not so sure. I mean, I agree that fear is one of the channels through which mass conformity was obtained, but there's also this architecture of power driven through NATO channels, that ensures conformity in society, and that makes pretty rational objectives official state policy. It was the persecution of the unvaccinated during the pandemic, and subsequently it was the preparation for the war against Russia. And this is why I will argue that Dix-Hof was not a technocratic prime minister in the sense that he was apolitical. No, he was an embodiment of the political structure that actually leads the Netherlands, irrespective of which party wins. There are the so-called systemic parties, as Thierry Baudet calls them, the party cartel. Thierry Baudet, the leader, former leader of the Forum for Democracy, the most authentic protest party in the Netherlands. And his role was very much political, so it was to keep society in line with the current narrative and the current trajectory, even though his government was the result of a protest vote. So this is how technocratic he was. Of course, having been the leader of the domestic intelligence service, it's quite ridiculous to assume that he was a specialist in, running the economy or something like this. He was a specialist in running the country for the interests of NATO, which he did in his previous role, and which he did as prime minister as well. Then, if we take Romania, the technocratic governments that Romania had, and that Romania is also embarking upon now, were made up of the special interests that govern Romania from abroad. So, for example, the Cioloș government. If you look at the ministerial positions, they were all allegedly politically neutral, in the sense that they did not belong to a specific political party at that time. However, their political view was very much partisan. So it was partisan to the foreign interests that ran Romania, and that still run Romania to this day. For example, as per my previous episode, I mentioned the fact that there's this lobby company registered in the United States that signed a contract with the Romanian presidency of $550,000 per month. I don't remember the duration of the contract. I think it's 1 year or something like this. So that company is headed by a guy who was in the technocratic government of Cioloș, and he was the head of the Internal Revenue Service, the Romanian tax office, essentially. And now he's a lobbyist on behalf of the Americans, getting money from the Romanian state to lobby the Romanian cause in the US Congress or something like this. So this is the level of technocracy that we had. And there are many examples. I cannot go through all the political appointees that were disguised as technocrats in the Cioloș government. But they were all the lobbyists of special private interests that run Romania to this day. The Romanian economy is basically a production and service outsourcing annex of Western capital. And in the past years, it has become more and more obvious that this is the force that governs Romania through its political intermediaries. And now, because Romania is out of a political government and has to make some sort of new government that could be voted by parliament and no political coalition is envisaged, the technocratic solution is again circulated. And it's even more ridiculous than last time, in the sense that one of the options that was taken into consideration for a technocratic prime minister was exactly the head lobbyist of the biggest employers union, of the biggest cartel of foreign investors in Romania, and he used to be their spokesperson, and now he was considered for being appointed as prime minister as a technocrat, allegedly. Then another option was circulated to be a lady from the International Monetary Fund, who is an American citizen and who has been living in the United States for decades, and who was the head of the negotiating team with Greece in 2011-12, when the Syriza government was fighting against the austerity measures imposed by the Troika, and she was the head of the Troika. So we would be having an IMF government without it even being imposed by the IMF. Just out of our own will, we would get an IMF economist to do the austerity for us on our behalf. And then what was finally agreed upon, and seems to be the next prime minister, is the technocratic option of a guy who was born in the Odessa region of Ukraine. So his area of expertise, because when you appoint a technocratic prime minister, somehow the assumption is that he knows something about the economy, or that he might have some sort of governance experience. This guy didn't have any governance experience. This guy is not an expert in the economy. He's a historian by profession. Well, not really a historian. He graduated history, let's say. And in which area of expertise is he a technocrat? He's a technocrat in being from Ukraine, from being from the Odessa region, because Romania is in the Odessa Triangle. There's this alliance of Romania, the Republic of Moldova, and Ukraine, in which there are all these preparations made for the interconnectivity of these countries. Of course, not for touristic purposes. Some of these initiatives, like building infrastructure in the Odessa Triangle, are promoted as being for tourism purposes. Like there's going to be a lot of tourists going into Odessa. But it's done under NATO auspices. It's also accompanied by the B9 initiative, which is the Eastern Front of NATO, the collaboration of the countries that are on the front lines in the next Barbarossa operation. And so it's quite obvious what the purpose of this collaboration is, the Odessa Triangle. And the Odessa Triangle will get a prime minister from this area of expertise, from being from the Odessa region. And apparently this is the most pressing policy issue of the Romanian government. This is where they needed a technocrat to work on. It could have been on reducing the budgetary deficit, and there the lady from the IMF would have come in handy. Or it could have been on catering more to the interests of foreign capital, and then the other guy from the employers union would have come in handy. But then it was decided that the main technocratic direction in which Romania should go, is the integration with Ukraine and with the Republic of Moldova in the Odessa Triangle. So then the next prime minister will be from the Odessa region, and his main specialty is being from the Odessa region. I mean, ever since he moved to Romania, he worked on issues pertaining to Romanians from the historical regions like Moldova, like Bucovina, like the Bujac, the part of Odessa region that used to be part of Romania. So this is his area of expertise. He's an expert on the Odessa region, and because Romania is part of the Odessa Triangle, and because the Odessa Triangle will become very relevant in the coming period, we will have a suitable prime minister, a technocrat who is a specialist in. I'm not sure if he's a specialist in triangles, but for sure he's a specialist in Odessa. So that will be Romania's #1 focus. And there are other examples of technocratic government I can bring up. So, for example, Bosnia, ever since the Dayton Accords, is governed by a technocrat, even though it's a federal state and it has two federal subjects, the Republic of Srpska and the Bosniak Croat Federation. On top of this, there's another layer, which is a German guy appointed by the party that brokered the Dayton Accord, and that has total executive power over Bosnia. It has complete veto authority. It can dissolve the legislatures. It can arrest the leaders, the presidents of the two entities, and it is doing just that. So there was this problem with the head of the Srpska Republic, that he did not comply with directives from the German guy, and then Milorad Dodik was arrested. He was convicted and subsequently brought to trial because there's this higher authority, this higher technocratic authority on top of the governance structure that is elected, and that is technocratic, working on behalf of German interests. And there was also the technocratic solution proposed for Gaza, right? The peace plan brokered by Jared Kushner, which would have had Tony Blair as governor of Gaza. Tony Blair was the technocrat, the technocratic solution, because he was apolitical. He was not a representative of either Fatah or Hamas, the two Palestinian political parties. And as a consequence, he was a technocrat. What is his area of specialty? War crimes. So after having committed war crimes in Iraq together with George W. Bush, he is deemed a good solution to represent the technocratic position in a future Gaza. So just as Trump said, seafront beach resorts, like Jared Kushner showed these PowerPoints with how the Riviera, the Gaza Riviera will look like. He is deemed a specialist in ethnic cleansing and in basically wiping out the domestic population of Gaza in order to make room for international capital developers. So this is kind of my take on technocracy. Whenever you hear that there's a technocratic government incoming, make sure that it represents a political position that is so strong that it is transpartinical. So even though parties may squabble among themselves to make up a political government, if they approve a technocratic government, for sure it is representing the political position of the forces that are above the political class, and that the political class upholds in its entirety, or at least that there is a majority inside the political class that upholds those interests. And those interests are usually those of international financial capital, as I've showed you until now. So thanks a lot for watching. If you like what I do, like, share, subscribe. And if you want to support my work, you'll find the link in the channel description of how to support me financially. And until next time, take care. Bye.